Hello, how's it going, guys? Hope you're doing well. Today, I just wanted to talk about a game that we played earlier in the week on stream. That game being Zone of the Enders. We played through the entirety of the game on stream from beginning to end, and it was such an interesting game that I thought I would just make a quick review / thoughts video on it for anyone who might want to check it out. And I'll do my best to avoid spoilers and just try and touch on things that are worth bringing up. So, Zone of the Enders is a third-person mecha action game where you take on other mechs and punch them into walls or blast them with laser cannons. It features really fast and frantic movement, and a lot of the encounters really take this to the nth degree. There are also a few other familiar names on the development team if you've played Metal Gear. Yoji Shinkawa worked on the game as an artist and designed the orbital frames, which are the mechs you're seeing on screen. The game was also directed and written by Noriaki Okamura, who had a hand in some of the Metal Gear games as well. If anything, Zone of the Enders is a really intriguing game for the connections it has to the Metal Gear franchise. Throughout the game, you can see all of the little touches from the hands that helped develop Metal Gear Solid 2. As a massive fan of the Metal Gear franchise, Zone of the Enders has always fascinated me just a little bit. So when we sat down to actually play the game on stream, I was very excited. First up, you may be wondering a couple of things about the footage you're seeing. First off, why is the game in 4:3 and why is it kind of blurry? That's because I played the game via the original PS2 version on my backwards compatible PS3. I can't vouch for the quality of the HD editions because I haven't played them, but from what I hear, they're not too bad. But what I can say is that the PS2 version of the game really is fantastic. It runs at a smooth 60 FPS, and there's just something about the original PS2-ness of the game that really sells the vibe and the atmosphere a lot more, in my opinion. So if you have access to a PS2 and have access to the original version of the game, I would say definitely play it that way if you can. When it comes to the storyline, Zone of the Enders isn't necessarily too unique when it comes to the mecha genre. In fact, it's pretty generic overall. You play as Leo, a kid caught in an attack on Antilia, which is a colony built near Jupiter. All of Leo's friends have died, and just as he was about to meet the same fate, he finds Jehudi, a state-of-the-art orbital frame that's ready to kick some ass. I am going to be brutally honest and say that the story in Zone of the Enders really isn't all that interesting. It rarely takes any interesting twists or turns that really add anything of note. And what few characters there are don't really get many interesting arcs. It's all pretty by the numbers. But outside the core plot, the universe that it sets up is pretty interesting. It doesn't really give much context as to why certain things are happening the way they are, though. Which is honestly kind of annoying. I wish I knew more about this world and why certain things are happening the way they are and all that stuff, but I guess it doesn't really matter. All you really need to know is that you have an ultra badass mech and you need to get the hell out of Dodge and save your best friend. That's quite literally it. Ultimately, while it is very thin, the story does do a pretty good job at carrying you through the game. Honestly, the story is probably the most disappointing aspect of the game, simply because there's just not really much to talk about. Like, even if this wasn't a spoiler-free thing, I don't know what I'd really mention because there just isn't really much to talk about. With all that said, though, I'm glad to get that stuff out the way because apart from the story, I like pretty much everything else in this game. A lot. Something to know about me is that I love mechs. That love kind of started with Metal Gear, and since then I've tried to watch as much mecha anime as I can. And for me, a mech game really has to sell the speed and ferocity of what a mech can truly be. And thank God, Zone of the Enders manages to capture that perfectly. Jehudi moves around the screen in such a buttery smooth way, and the speed that it can go feels fast yet controllable. The responsiveness of Jehudi is honestly kind of incredible, and it makes some of the game's more intense battles so much more fun. You'll be ducking and weaving under enemy lasers, gunfire, and sword swings, and it all comes together so beautifully. Something I did not expect from Zone of the Enders was a sort of exploration aspect. In a lot of the levels, you can find sub-weapons that you can equip Jehudi with. Unfortunately, most of them are pretty useless, and most of them are also needed to actually progress in the game, but I think some of them were optional, and they do add a kind of unique spice to the combat. My personal favorite was the massive fuck-off laser beam. I really like the combat in this game, and that's really fortunate because you kind of have to love the combat because that's all this game is. It's combat after combat after combat. To be honest though, that's not really a bad thing, it's a mecha game. What else are you really gonna do apart from fight other mechs? I'm really not sure how else you would spice up the gameplay. Maybe some other mech game does some really cool stuff that helps that feeling of repetitiveness, but I don't really mind it. And to be fair to Zone of the Enders, as I mentioned just now, they do try and add in some spots of exploration here and there. For example, some levels have a weird little tower chest thing you can find. Some of them are locked and require a password, which you can get by defeating a group of enemies that have password written under their little box name things. And some of the levels actually do require a little bit more exploration than others. And the game's few boss encounters does help shake things up, but I have a few nitpicks with these too. I find that Zone of the Enders combat is most fun when you're dueling it out with other mechs. You know, properly clashing sword against sword in a fight to the death, before breaking off and softening up other targets with some ranged shots. The problem is that most bosses seem to be way more focused on ranged combat. In fact, you're actively punished by using melee because some of them will not let you do it and will just straight up almost kill you. And when fights do let you use melee, it's almost always a bad idea because ranged weapons do so much damage anyway. So actually the best strategy is to use ranged weapons and just stay away from the enemies at all times. And that gets kind of boring pretty quickly, but most of the game's combat I really enjoyed. I love the fast and frenetic energy it has, and in the 4-hour runtime, it never really got too boring. And yes, you heard me right, this game is only 4 hours long. And that playtime could have been even shorter if I didn't suck at times. It's a short one, but I think that works in its favor. Any longer, and the combat would have absolutely become too repetitive. If there's anything that Zone of the Enders excels in, it's in its tone and atmosphere. It has the classic charm of those early PS2 titles. It comes from a bygone age of sci-fi stories. The two most obvious inspirations are Ghost in the Shell for its strange and melancholic atmosphere, and Evangelion. You can chuck in any mecha show from the 90s and find some comparisons to draw on though. And visually speaking, I think the game is wonderful to look at, from the design of the orbital frames themselves as they clash in midair, to the melancholic backgrounds of a city under siege. I especially love the eerie consequence of the draw distance being kind of bad. It adds a lot to the game's darker mood. It doesn't quite match up to later Konami titles from a visual standpoint, but it gets a lot of extra points from me for its unique mood. The music is especially fantastic and offers anything you could want from a futuristic setting that details the horrors of war and the strange beauty of these machines that are entirely designed to kill other people. And to draw even more comparisons to Ghost in the Shell, we have the same sort of moody opening music and frantic techno beats that are perfect to kick ass to. It really does bring me back to the early 2000s, and even though I was only about 2 when this game came out, it has somehow triggered a massive bout of nostalgia for me. I really do love the way this game feels, and while there are certainly problems I have with it, I am still walking away with a giant smile on my face. There's only really one thing that I needed this game to do well, and that was the mech combat. Honestly, if the combat was not as good as it ended up being, I probably would not have even bothered to make this video. But what I got was that, alongside a game that had such an enticing mood that I'm still thinking about right now. Zone of the Enders is not a perfect game. In fact, it's deeply flawed in so many ways, but it's also one that manages to do so many things right that I can't really fault it for its shortcomings. I'm coming away from Zone of the Enders giving it a 7.5 out of 10, but to me, it's an incredibly memorable game that's still sticking with me for some reason. I am very excited to try out Zone of the Enders, the second runner, sometime in the future, and since I had such a good time with the PS2 version of this game, I am working on tracking down a copy of the second game as well. I'm really intrigued to see where the second game improves on certain mechanics and hopefully the storyline. And honestly, the story in Zone of the Enders leaves it off in a pretty interesting way, so yeah, I'm hoping it can follow through. Honestly, if you're a fan of the sort of vibe that this game kind of evokes, I would absolutely suggest that you try it out. And if you want to play the game via the PS2, copies for it really aren't that rare, at least in the UK. If you do end up giving it a go, please let me know down in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter. I would love to talk about this game more with people, and hell, if you've already played the game and you've got a long history with Zone of the Enders, please don't hesitate to get in touch as well. I need to talk about this game to someone. I need to talk about this game. No one I know gives a shit, please. But anyway, that's it from me. Just wanted to do a quick little thoughts video on Zone of the Enders. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of this sort of thing, please let me know in the comments below and all that good shit. You know, thumbs up the video, like it, all that stuff. Subscribe too, why not? You know. Anyway, that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye bye.